But the escape clause is when we lift up mine eyes unto the hills from whence cometh my help. The escape clause is to go within and find the center of that unceasing pendulum of the law of karma. Last week the subject that Padma spoke on was reincarnation. And sometimes when the disciples would gather around Yogananda there at Mount Washington or other places, he would say some interesting things about reincarnation. For example, he said that Hitler was a reincarnation of Alexander the Great, quote unquote, and because of his lightning tactics of attack. Mussolini was a reincarnation of Mark Antony, I think it was, and Napoleon reincarnated as Winston Churchill because Napoleon wanted to destroy England, and Churchill had to preside over the dismantling of the British Empire during and after World War II. And on like that. Joseph Stalin had been Genghis Khan and fun sort of things like that. But in many ways, memory is way overrated. Okay, I know it's important, but the other day I was watching this really stupid movie on Thanksgiving evening. I awarded myself the time to watch a stupid movie, and it had a very famous actor in it. And I was thinking I should tell Padma I had watched this movie. I couldn't remember the name of Robert Redford. I mean, come on, Even when I was young and had kids, I'd look at them and couldn't remember their names, Because in God all is revealed. And we get, and whose children are they anyway, right? I mean, it's way overrated. Just think of, well, I don't know if you ever have tried to think, but very good. You're awake and ready. This is great. I'm going to do really good today. But imagine the burden on our minds if we could know and remember all of our past lives. There's probably nothing we haven't been in some form or another, evil or good or successful or failure. And so it's a good thing we get a fresh start with each incarnation. The fact that some people object, well, how could it be true? We don't remember. The fact is now in this world of connectivity, there's lots of people who do remember. The one story I enjoyed particularly because it was from America was the story of the boy who had died as a pilot off the coast of Japan. Anybody remember what the name of that story was? Anyway, it doesn't come to me right now, but an American family, parents who were just sort of ordinary Christian types, they were astonished, and they went through this journey with this kid, and there it was, reincarnation. But the law of karma is, imagine this, for example. The law of karma basically has its manifestation in physics with the reaction. For every reaction there's an equal, every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. In the law of nature we have cause and effect. Just imagine what our life would be if we couldn't depend on the law of cause and effect. There'd be no science because you couldn't necessarily duplicate anything. It'd be like, imagine the world without the law of gravity. It would be pretty chaotic. And so God generally abides by the laws that rule this world that God has created, otherwise the world can't function. But of course for us it's a bit of a drag. And really the solution to the law of karma isn't just to get things right. That's a good start. I call that the the law, stage 1 stoicism. You know, you just learn to accept what comes. You try to do what's good and right in your life. You know, it's getting your act together, all right, in order to deal with what comes in life. And neither wealth, nor fame, nor beauty, nor any success. Everyone suffers the threefold ills of illness, old age, and death. And so that's a good start. You know, virtue is a great start. Now, in the Jewish tradition, and frankly, they say the Jewish tradition, but it's everywhere, is this thought that when something bad happens to us, what was that song Julie Andrews sang in The Sound of Music? I must have done something good, right? Because I'm having good karma. And by the way, karma isn't necessarily good or bad. It's just karma, the law of, you know, action and reaction and so on and so forth. Is it good karma to be born wealthy and to waste your life? That's, you know. So there's nothing good nor bad. Yogananda would say all conditions are neutral. It's just the attitude of the mind that says this is good karma, that is bad karma. But nonetheless, deeply embedded into our DNA is this feeling that when, quote, bad things that we label as bad come to us, it must be because we've done something bad, right? Well, one of the earliest in historical terms, in terms of scriptural history, refutations of that was the very famous book of Job, one I've gotten a lot of inspiration of and have mentioned over the years in different classes and talks that I've done. But here was Job, that righteous man, and he was well off. And of course, that was ascribed to his righteousness, right? He had, you know, a lot of goats and sheep or whatever it was to be well off in those days, and lots of children, naturally. And so Satan was sitting around having some coffee with the good Lord up above in heaven, and God says, "What do you think of my guy, Job, the righteous man?" And Satan says, take away his wealth and his status, etc., and just see how righteous the guy will be. So they made a bet. I mean, imagine. And so Satan gets permission to go down there and whack poor old Job, right? Well, you know the story. He kills off everything and some of his kids and this, that, the other thing. And he goes through just incredible misery. And then first stage is he loses his wealth. He hangs on to his faith with God. Next stage, he loses his health. Okay, that gets it a little more personal. And so on and so forth. And his friends, you have friends like this? His friends come around and say, "Hey, Job, what'd you do wrong, right? You schmuck," you know, because his suffering must surely because he's a schmuck. And so, well, you know that story, how it goes. And, you know, Job at one point is really down in the mouth, literally. And so he's arguing with God. He says, "You schmuck," and he goes on like this. And then God speaks, and he says, he really nails the poor guy. He says, "Where were you at the dawn of creation?" In other words, how can you know what's really going on? All right? And then Job apologizes, and he restores his faith in God. And so his trials were not the result of his unrighteousness. It was a test. One of the famous stories, I had a big argument with my teacher, Swami Kriyananda, over this story, and I'm not going to tell you about the argument because it doesn't look good to me. But it's chapter 9. It's a beautiful chapter, actually. It's actually quite short, and the entire chapter of John, chapter 9 in the Gospel, is this story. That's how important it is. So, you know, Jesus and his folks, guys or whatever, walking along, and they come across a blind man. Now, the implication in the story is this guy is sitting there every day, all right? I mean, they sort of know him, okay? And so kind of as a rhetorical, Jesus turns to his disciples and says, "Hey, guys, why do you think this guy's blind? Is it because he was blind since birth, okay? So he says, did he sin? Or did his parents sin? And actually, maybe the disciples asked Christ that. I don't remember. It doesn't matter. And Jesus says, neither sinned. Now, first off, Kriyananda points out in his writings a very interesting point, which is that if this guy sinned and was born blind, he must have had a past life. Nobody even questioned that fact in the dialogue, in the chapter. And in a way, Jesus sidestepped the whole issue of reincarnation very neatly, but there was a higher purpose, and it's this higher purpose, because this man, nor his parents, committed any transgression for the fact that he was blind. For the glory of God, Jesus said, was this man born blind. And then, of course, he healed them, and it's quite an interesting story. The man was very, I don't know if sweet is the word, but he was very innocent. And he gets dragged before the judge of the Sanhedrin, the whatever they were, the Jewish guys who ran the place. And they tried to shake him down, and tried to accuse him of all sorts of things. You weren't really born, you weren't blind, and all this. They even dragged in the poor guy's parents to say, was he born blind? And he said, yeah. And they tried to get the parents to say this Jesus guy was, a prophet or whatever. And nobody wanted to touch it because they knew that if they, agreed with. But finally, the man, in his own sort of sweet way, he said, I don't know if he's a saint or a sinner, basically, but he's a prophet. I do know I was blind, and now I can see. And so it's both stories of Job and this blind man are curious, because does it suggest that we just get arbitrarily tested, just whack? God just wants to see. Well, maybe that's true, and maybe it's not. You see, the law of karma governs this planet as much as the law of gravity. But when you are a devotee, you see, there's a way out. There's an escape clause to the law of karma. And the escape clause is more than just trying to get your life together. That's a good thing to do for most people. That's what most people try to do. Get make my New Year's resolution coming up here. I'm going to change my diet. I'm going to exercise every day. That's the law of cause and effect. And thank God it exists, because we can change our lives. But that's that's okay. I'm not going to knock it. But it is only good karma. So you get your health back. Then what? Okay? Then you fall again, maybe? I don't know. So that just puts you back to zero. That isn't salvation. It isn't eternal joy. It's nothing. It's just zero. So it's good. We all need to do it. But the escape clause is when we lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. The escape clause is to go within and find the center of that unceasing pendulum of the law of karma, and to find our center and lift our consciousness up into the oneness of the Spirit that dwells within us, the Christ, the living Christ that is within us. I want to read one of the stories that have always meant, I don't know, it's not a lot to me personally or anything, but it's just such a beautiful story. It illustrates. This is in Luke chapter 7, and see if I can find the start of it. This was when, Jesus did a lot of walking. So he was walking around, and I forget what town they're in now, but it doesn't really much matter. He ate with a lot of people. We do a lot of eating, don't we? Thanksgiving, and that's one of the things we really do well around here at Ananda is eat. That's very unique, right? Mm-hmm, right. Anyway, so he would eat with sinners and this and that, but in this case, he went to the home of one of the Pharisees, one of the, whatever they were, I don't know that you'd call them priests necessarily, but teachers of the law. And one of the Pharisees asked him, in fact, Jesus, to come and dine with him. And so he went to his house and sat down. And behold, a woman in the city, which was a sinner, we can only imagine what sort of a sinner she was, but they don't actually say, which was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus was sitting in the Pharisee's house having dinner, brought an alabaster box of ointment and stood at his feet behind him, weeping, and began to wash his feet with her tears, and did wipe them with the hairs of her head, and kissed his feet and anointed them with the ointment. Now when the Pharisee, which saw this, he said to himself, this man, if he were a prophet, would have known who and what manner of woman this is that touches him. You know, they, like Hindus and others, you know, had all sorts of laws of uncleanliness. And so he had this thought. And Jesus, answering his thought, said to him, Simon, I have somewhat to say unto thee. And so I'm not going to read what he said, but basically he points out that Simon didn't wash his feet when he came into his house or any number of other things. And then he says, and then he tells a little story. Jesus loved these parables. He said, there was a certain creditor which had two debtors. One owed him 500 pence and the other 50. And when they had nothing to pay, he frankly forgave them both. Tell me then, Simon, which of them will love him most? And Simon answered and said, I suppose he to whom he forgave the most. And Jesus said, thou hast rightly judged. Seest thou this woman, he says? I entered into thine house, and you gave me no water, no, etc., etc. And wherefore I say unto thee, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she has loved much. And then he turned to her and said, thy sins are forgiven. You see, that's the escape clause. When we open our hearts to the one source of all life and worship that, meaning, what does it mean to worship? I've never liked that phrase. It just connotes images that I don't really relate to. But what it means is to, when I look towards, I attune towards, I emulate, I want to receive, I want to be in the presence of. And to receive, as John said, as many as received him, to them gave he the power to become the sons of God. This is the escape clause. And what happens is that to the degree we live in that light, it's not that the karma isn't there, but when you snip, you see what, you know those little paddle boards that have the rubber band and the ball, and like that, right? Well, that's the boomerang that comes back. So when I do something, I'll give you an example. If I run over somebody with my car, it was an accident. My fine or jail sentence or whatever it is way different than if I commit murder one. If I intend, you see, intention has everything to do with the consequences. And when we have done something and that intention is connected to us like that rubber ball because I did that to you, then boing, it comes back to me. If I cut the rubber band and there's no ego left, that ball isn't going to find me. And even if there is a rebound, there's no ego to even notice it, to accept it, or in more practical terms, to react to it. It simply is. What comes of itself, Yoganandaji said, let it come. You see, that's where the two stages, the one stage being I become calm and even-minded and accept things, operates with That's the giveaway of ego, operates in conjunction with the uptake into divine love and divine power and grace that eliminates the impact of our karma. Ramakrishna's wife, Sarda Devi, used the example. She said that if it's your karma to lose, a limb, an arm or something, in the divine light, you might just get a scratch on your arm, but you will barely even notice, you see. And so it is that, and an additional promise is that even when you achieve enlightenment, it means that you have achieved that place, yogas chitta vritti nirod, where the reactive processes to events and thoughts and images and memories and so forth has completely, I'm simply in that space of spirit, all right? But the interesting thing is that to get there, you don't have to dig up and deal with all of that karma. Whatever karma is in the past, buried, you might say, in your subconscious, you can deal with in that enlightened state. That's the escape clause. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you. Not just material things, which is usually how we interpret it, but also freedom from the law of karma. This is the promise of the scriptures. This is the promise of our immortality. I used to wonder, what does the word eternal? You have in the Christian religion, I don't know, I don't encounter this so much in the Vedas and so forth, but they're constantly talking about eternal life and, this, that, and the other. Well, sure, we could say infinity is eternal and all that stuff, but what does it mean here and now? Eternity here and now is to live in that grace, is to live in that non-reactive state that sees all as the one, sees all as spirit, sees all that comes to us as a gift, you see. Now, that's a high bar, I grant you, but what is the choice that we have? Countless reincarnations. Reincarnations where we have no idea why we were born here, no idea why we're good at this and we're a schmuck at that, and so on and so forth. It just goes on until, as it says in the autobiography of a yogi, until the soul awakens to the anguishing monotony of repeated rounds of birth, rebirth. Now, how does that happen? Reawaken that's the key. Patanjali says it's smriti, it's memory. We're back to memory. But this is a divine memory. And it's awakened by the coming of the Christ in human form. Because on our own, we are in the prison of karma. Sure, we can be good bunnies one life and bad bunnies the next, and this, that, and the other, but it just never stops. Okay? The pendulum never stops. When the divine takes human form and transmits the power of the light, which doesn't need human form, but we need the human form. And thus it is that some of the greatest disciples of Buddha and Christ and different ones have lived centuries after their human life because their power does not wane with the absence of the physical form. But that divine light taking human form to prove to us that the human form is enlightened or has the potential is what awakens us. But the purpose of that isn't the worship of the human form, what to mention anyone's particular human form. It's the awakening. That's the second coming. The second coming, the birth of the Christ, is something that takes place in each one of us. And nurturing that child is the combination of our effort and that grace within us. And so the law of karma is exacting, it's precise, but there's a way out. And the only way out is in.
From the depths of slumber as I ascend the spiral stairway